So what we're going to be talking about is secure assessment tasks in a time of AI. Now, this is something that everybody in the room, everybody in the waiting room, everybody everywhere is familiar with, talking about, concerned about, unsure, uncertain about. But what we're going to be doing is looking at it from a particular perspective, which is tasks. Now, in one way, tasks are all we think about when we think of assessment. It's very natural, especially for all the teachers in the room who are designing tasks, marking tasks, to think about it from that perspective. But a lot of what AI seems to do is challenge that narrow focus. A lot of the instant responses to AI, or the natural responses, at least that I have, are to think more broadly about the way that we think about assessment and the way we conduct assessment within units, within structures, within subjects, whatever the case may be. But a lot of that is still going to be made up of tasks. You can't get rid of tasks entirely. It's still going to be made up of things. So what's happening with those and how does AI interact with those? And then how does that interaction impact the way we understand and the kind of concerns we have about assessment in a time of AI? So Cradle's been doing a little bit of this. So I'm going to brag about Cradle because it's a Cradle webinar, so I'm allowed to. Jack Walton and some other fantastic people have recently published on the essay because the essay is one of those tasks that I think everyone had those initial responses to. Well, AI turns up, the essay's dead, isn't it? Well, maybe, but what do we lose? What are we thinking about when that task is given to students or when we design tasks around essays? Why do we do it in the first place? And what is it about AI that means it's dead or we can't use it anymore? Should we be banning teachers from using essays or not? So that paper, I think Jack's just put it in the chat by the looks of it, came out a couple of weeks ago, and it explores that task. And I think that's not necessarily what we're going to do. We're not going to sit here for the next hour and go through every single task we can think of. But I think we do want to be thinking about the way that tasks are impacted by AI and how that changes the way we think about assessment. So we've got a fantastic group here. We've got Phil Dawson, who's one of the co-directors of Cradle, Kane Murdoch, and Kath Ellis. We are missing one Danny Liu, but that's probably for the best anyway, really. So we're going to have a great discussion. And if Danny joins us later, or if he's in the participant list and can hear me hear me talking about him, please raise your hand or something, and then I'll completely fail to figure out how to make you on the big screen. But yeah, I'm not sure, wave or something. Otherwise, we'll get started and start talking about this. Now, one way we frame this, Danny, here he is. He can hear me saying all these fabulous things about him. I definitely was saying lovely things about you, Danny. uh, welcome. You just missed the brief intro, but we're going to get started by talking about what we talked about in the blurb, which is security and validity. Now, out of all of us, I think, Phil, you've written more about validity. I'm particularly thinking about the way you framed validity in the Validity Matters More Than Cheating paper. And I wonder if I could point to you to kick us off with a discussion about why validity matters and how that might relate to tasks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Thomas. So, yeah, we did that paper, Validity Matters More Than Cheating. Um, it's, I mean, it is what it says on the tin. Is often this jumping to, in a time of AI, we've got to stop students from cheating, we've got to stop them from using AI, we've got to do this, that, and the other. But it's actually not the main game. The main game is, do our assessments do what we say they can do? Do they assess what we mean to assess? Um, I, if I'm setting an assessment task in my home discipline of computer science, like I experienced, which was pen and paper exams, I have written tons of computer code in pen and paper exams. Now, pretty, yeah, relatively secure, although I would point to work by Tracy Brеттag, Rowena Harper, Kath Ellis, and colleagues on, maybe some assumptions we make about exams are not necessarily always true. But yeah, reasonably secure, sitting down pen and paper exams, terrible validity to what the authentic assessment people would call the criterion context. The criterion context is sitting down on a computer and writing code. Being able to do that in pen and paper versus sit at a computer with all your resources and whatever other tools are available to you, that's the criterion context. So in that context, we've got an attempt at assessment security that's actually a negative for assessment validity. But the whole goal was validity. Like the whole goal is that people that cross the graduation stage can do the things, have met the outcomes. So That's why we take this validity matters more than cheating argument. Now,
Mm.
validity, huge complex word, tons of different meanings. I'd point to paper by St. Onge and colleagues, where they talk about, the many different forms it can take and whatever. I think sometimes, though, the fanciness of validity makes us scared of it as a concept. I think it's a concept everyone on this call, everyone who assesses should use. It's your word. It's not a word just for psychometricians. It's
Mm.
our word. So grab the word, use it. Let's go.
For Danny in particular, because you joined late, one thing to note is this is going to be very informal, jump in and jump out at any time. And we are going to leave at least 20 minutes, but hopefully a bit more for talking to the audience and hearing some questions. So if you're in the audience, do please use the Q&A function to chuck your questions in there. But Phil, I'm just going to put you a little bit more pressure before we jump to everybody else, and as much as I'm directing anything, everyone else jump in and out. But you mentioned it's our word. Now, can I ask what that means? Like, is an assessment either valid or not? I mean, how does validity work from a task perspective, I guess?
Yeah, and again, this is one where there's so much debate in the literature, and I think often that can make it a bit inaccessible. So for me, I can say I try not to use validity in a binary sort of sense. It's valid or it's not valid.
Mhm.
Because I think there's no perfectly valid assessment, and there's few assessments that have no meaning at all. Um, Validity is also not really a property of the task. So it's not that the task is more or less valid. It's about the arguments and the inferences that you draw from it. So, for example, I go back to my computer science exams. If your goal was to produce evidence on my ability to write code in an exam setting or sit still for 3 hours or whatever, you may be able to mount a pretty reasonable argument on that. If your goal is to demonstrate that I'm not a psychopath, there's very
Mm.
little validity evidence either way. I'm not sure it's good at proving or disproving psychopathy. So the validity argument is pretty poor there. Now, importantly, in higher ed, we don't want to be making any decisions that matter a lot based on a single task, because our ability to make high quality inferences from a single task of a single type assessed by a single assessor is really thin. Uh, Multiple tasks, multiple types at different points in time, marked by different people. That's how we
Mm.
make a stronger validity argument. However, all of them come from an amalgamation of single points of evidence, and those single points of evidence do still matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Kane, I can see you nodding enthusiastically, so I'm going to
Yeah.
throw over to you.
Phil put up something during the week on LinkedIn. I'm sure if you go back through his timeline, you can find it. It was a big kind of chart of things, and I forget all the detail, but it occurred to me just as you were saying that, Phil, that whole question of, and we always bring it down to individuals. So you run your unit, and we just stack up all the units, and we're still, I think, like 3 years after ChatGPT, most places are still thinking basically like that. It's a collection of individual points rather than any kind of crossed lines. And I mean that in a positive sense. And I proposed, and you were quite amused in a good way about it, kind of stripping out, just going, no, 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 you can teach anything you like relatively, but we're going to take away your ability to set the tasks. And I kind of generally like the idea of change. So it really appealed to me a lot. Oh, that's it. Thanks, Phil. Um, but I think when we're thinking about what you just said, what we're trying to do is build up a better picture. And we're also trading off things. So, in some senses, not every task is going to be authentic, which is a word that gets thrown out. Not every task is going to be maximally accessible to everyone. There will be variations, even with affordances given to students, or accommodations, sorry. And I think if we start to think about these things in a more complex way, rather than just trying to replicate the simplistic way we've run it, which is kind of effectively, it's broken. If we're honest with ourselves, it has broken like catastrophically, in part because of ChatGPT, but it's in part because there was a hole to drive the bus through, and the bus is
Mm.
gone. So let's not chase the bus. I don't want to ramble on too much.
No, I like you rambling on. Um, but before we do ramble on further on down that train, I want to point out that my own proclivity to ramble on means that I wasn't thinking things through, and I've completely forgot a absolutely crucial part of this, which is the acknowledgement of country. And I'm very sorry about that, but please forgive me. So before we go any further, I just want to take a step back
Thanks.
and acknowledge that. The traditional custodians of all unceded lands, waterways, and skies on which deacon students and staff come together are hosting and this important conversation, as well as so many other important conversations, not about AI, but about so much that's going on at the moment. And as we learn and teach through these spaces, which aren't just virtual, but obviously here in this virtual space that we're seeing each other, are just so important, but also the physical and the other constructed places across time. We'd like to pay our deep respect to the ancestors and elders of all the countries that we're coming together on, especially Wadawurrung country, Eastern Maar country, where the physical campuses of Deakin are located. So sorry about that, but I think it's really important to take the time to stand out and do that. But getting back into it, Kane and Danny, Kath, that might have derailed your conversation, but derailed your thoughts a little bit. So I'll give you a second to get back into it. But Kane, has the bus actually gone away? I mean, I like that metaphor, but the bus is still here, isn't it?
I think the bus has driven off years ago.
Oh,
In
right. That,
some disciplines, and like it's not a across the board thing. It's not the same for everything. But
right,
in some disciplines, the bus drove out the door years ago. It's gone.
right.
And ChatGPT just gave it, we just installed a turbo onto the bus. That's really the only difference. We made it cheaper. Well, we didn't make it, but you know, circumstance made it cheaper, easier, more accessible, and actually less of a kind of criminal framing for it. You know, no one's claiming that ChatGPT breaks the academic cheating services law in Australia,
Mm,
but it does effectively the same thing faster and cheaper.
mm,
So I don't see how it's defensible that we haven't lost control of that bus.
right.
So I think anything that looks like a kind of quick fix or a simple fix that doesn't have far-reaching consequences isn't addressing the issues.
Yeah, I agree. And in part, the recent paper that we wrote on understanding AI as a wicked problem does try and address that. But I can also see I guess the counter argument to that, which is the need for something in place at the moment, which
Mm.
attempts to do that, I guess. And Kath, I can see you nodding enthusiastically to Kane. Was that a willingness to jump in on that point, or I've asked when you're physically the furthest away from your unmute button, sorry.
That's all right. I mean, I completely agree with Kane. I mean, I've been talking now about the challenge that contract cheating presents, and particularly
Mhm.
the commercially provided contract cheating services presents to our industry for almost exactly 11 years, because
Mm.
the 14th of November marks the 11th year anniversary since the My Master scandal, which is when I really woke up to the problem. Um, and so that's what Kane, I think, is alleging or talking about, is that's the sort
Yeah.
of
Yep.
the dust we're now eating is the settling dust of the bus that's gone through the hole in the side of our infrastructure. But I might circle back around, if I may, Thomas, to some to sort of amplify some points that Phil's made, having enthusiastically nodded and agreed with what Kane's just said. I mean, he's been walking that journey alongside me for a big chunk of that 11 years. But I just want to circle back to a point that Phil's made about validity, when he talked about the inferences we draw from our assessment, um, rather than the assessment tasks themselves, are the things that need to have validity. Because that's the thing I want us to focus our energies on when we think about assessment tasks. Because in effect, what Phil was talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Phil, is that the decisions that we make on the basis of our assessment of student learning need to be worthy of trust. They need to be trustworthy. And Michael Caine, not that Michael Caine, but another Michael Caine, who is one of these what would you call them? Psychometricians, psychomagicians? I don't know.
I like psychomagicians quite a lot.
Okay, let's go with that. He draws on some other scholarship, which I think is really interesting. He says, for a decision to be worthy of trust, it needs to be clear, coherent, and plausible. Clear, everybody who needs to be able to understand it needs to be able to understand it. Coherent, and this is one of the big points I think Phil's just been making, it needs to have everything that's needed to make that decision and nothing that's not. So multiple points of information. And it needs to be plausible. It needs to pass the pub test. But I also call out to my friend and colleague, former colleague, Professor Carla Treloar, who does a lot of work in the social determinants of health. And she also talks about how a trustworthy decision needs to have fidelity. And what she means by that is it needs to be in the best interests of that person. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's always what they want. Sometimes it's what they need. And sometimes it's in the best interests of a student to leave our community. So it's just one example. But I want to come back to this question of a task, because you've been talking about it a lot, Thomas. That's what we're talking about here today. And Phil's been talking about it a lot as well. But I just want to sneak up on it from behind if I can. Because one of the dangerous ideas I want to share at the moment, and in fact, it's a bit of a sneak peek, I'm doing a provocation to CALT tomorrow, which is the so it's a council or community or committee of Australian University Learning and Teaching Leaders, I think is what it stands for. One of the provocations that I'm going to be making, and I will, it is writing back to or speaking back to your excellent paper, Thomas, about the wicked problem. But I want to push it further. I agree that our problem bears all the hallmarks of being a wicked one. I agree with you completely. But
I
think
disagree, incidentally, but please, sorry.
But I think it also looks and feels very much like we're going through a paradigm shift. And I would like us to start thinking about the possibility of it being a paradigm shift. Danny and I have actually talked about this at another moment. And so this is an idea I'm exploring at the moment. But to me, the signs are there in our discourse in a Foucauldian sense of the words that we choose and the words that we use speak our truths and our values. In other words, they play out what we think of teaching and learning and assessment and feedback play out through our normative discourse. So just chuck 4 words at you that I think we are getting a little bit wrong, or 3 in particular. One of the things I'm really pushing hard at the moment at Western Sydney University is that we insist that we use the word assess as an active verb. Phil's already talked in this term today, that we see it as an active verb to assess. And it is an active verb that is enacted by teachers, not by students. We have this really big tangle that we think students do assessment. They don't. No. Teachers do assessment. And it's a moral, ethical, professional, and legal obligation to measure learning. That's something we're accountable for. Then we assure it. This isn't the next word I want to throw in here. We do it to assure. We allocate credit when learning of a passable standard is attained. So we measure it and then we recognise whether it is a passable standard through that measurement, and that's assurance. And then we warrant. We award a qualification that is itself worthy of trust. Again, this trustworthiness. So it has structural integrity. And I think we're all getting really comfortable and confident with you talking about award integrity rather than academic integrity, such that each graduate who crosses the graduation stage, as Phil's talked about before, is worthy of trust, is trustworthy. So that's why I'd like us to focus our energies back on talking about assessment tasks as nouns, right? Nouns that are undertaken, produced by students, and it's their personal responsibility to demonstrate actual, and by that I mean embodied learning. You've heard me talk a lot about embodied learning, I'm sure, that learning is something that cannot be outsourced because it is embodied like sleep, nutrition, and exercise. You can't outsource it. You carry it around inside you. So it's that personal responsibility of students to demonstrate actual learning for assessment, which is the stuff we do, assurance, which is what we do, and warranting, which is what we do. And for that, they pay a fee. Like I'm just trying to crack open the way in which we talk about assessment
Mm.
to get back to the truths of what we're doing here.
That's so interesting, Gav. I wonder though, in respect of you taking the wicked problems idea further, I wonder if I can push back and say how we could take that further. Because as much as I very much agree that we need these new ways of understanding these concepts, new ways of sharpening these concepts. But I think we might also need a better radar for telling when that needs to happen. I often think about the idea of zombie concepts, which is often used in anthropology and psychology and places like that, which are concepts that were alive and well and walking around and doing great work in society, but are now dead. They seem like they're alive and well. They're walking around, they've got heads and hands and stuff, but they're actually doing all this harm. They're no longer these productive members. I think about Jess Lowell's work at HKU on originality, that idea that originality seemed like it was a sensible, straightforward kind of thing, but now in the context of AI, what does it mean? But so often, like you pointing out, these things that we kind of take for granted and suddenly shift over time, we don't realize how important it is to revalue those things and rethink about what that word actually means. What does assessment mean? How are we applying it? And what are the ramifications of applying it in the way that we are? And I think that's just so important. Um, yeah, I'm trying to remove Kane from the chat in the background after he disagreed with my paper as well, but I can't figure out how to do that yet. So I'll remove him later.
Only a little bit.
Danny, if you've got any burning ideas to contribute at the moment, then I'm happy to pass over to you. But I've got one that I can put on foist on you if you wanted, if you didn't have anything you'd wanted to jump in with.
Let's do yours.
So my thing was. We've talked a lot about tasks and spreading things over tasks, looking at things over the space of time, over the space of a unit, over the space of other things. And I think that makes sense, but I think you could read that in two very diametrically opposed ways. One of those ways is that once you start spreading assessment, once you start thinking about assessment as spread, then tasks become less important because what you're doing is over time and it evens out the imbalances and whatever. But the other space is you could see them as more important because suddenly the individual tasks, you need to get them right. Otherwise, just talking about them overall doesn't make any sense. So I think a lot of people might read that same sentence as two different things, and I wonder if both are valid. Sorry, well, we can only use valid in certain kinds of ways, maybe. I wonder if both of those are appropriate, or if one of them's not, or one of them is better. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking in my head. Do
So
you
is,
choose to answer that, Danny, or something else entirely?
so is the purpose of those tasks to, well, to use Kath's words, to assure learning? The purpose of those spread tasks is the purpose of spreading them,
Yeah.
the spread tasks to assure learning.
Yep.
Then I guess what you want is students need regular points where they can have trustworthy measures of whether they're gaining capability. And if those trustworthy measures are all clumped in one part of a student's journey, then they're not going to have those trustworthy measures at times where they can correct course or change course. And so in a way, the spread of tasks, assured tasks or tasks where there is more assurance is important for the students, for pedagogy, not just the assessment idea, but also just for learning and teaching itself. And so in a way, you need that kind of, you need to get those spread tasks, individual tasks right, because you need to give students that update of how they're developing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's interesting though, if we think about the trustworthy part, the part that we have ultimate control over, and the parts that students have more control over, i.e., learning, doing activities which involve learning and the development of learning, they're not necessarily the same thing. Like over, the development of higher ed as we know it up to date, it has pretty much been that we get students in, it's mandated that they have to do an assessment task prior to census, and they do a collection of assessment tasks, which in the end, we go yes or no, it passed, i.e., it's assured. But our basic problem is that if that's all that students are doing, the tasks, where's all the rest in the middle?
Mm.
I.e., where's the independent learning? And I think we've loaded too much onto tasks and they've all weakened as a result. Multiple choice online quizzes, perfect example. We get the students to do them, but we actually assign marks to them. And they're one of the most commonly cheated tasks you'll find. So I think we have to transfer back some of the responsibility for learning to students. We've taken it all on ourselves to get them to do these things because the fear of failure, and that's universities fearing to fail students. That's a very different thing from students fearing failure.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Ken. I just noticed I'm not keeping an eye on the chat as much as I should be, but I just noticed Amanda's comment about having a colleague who refuses to consider formative assessment tasks as actual assessment. And I was thinking about what you said, Ken, and I just like,
Exactly.
right. Hmm.
Exactly. Like if we can't secure those tasks we can't assure those tasks, we can't stand by them, they shouldn't necessarily be contributing towards our view about whether a student has achieved the learning outcomes we expect them to achieve. They can
And
contribute to a student's learning, obviously.
Kane, I think you need to push harder. You've said we need to push more of the responsibility of learning back onto students. Students should shoulder all of the responsibility of
Wow.
doing the work of learning. It
I
should, no,
think the
honestly.
motivation perhaps is what I'm
Oh no,
speaking to there. But
I'm
I
talking
agree,
about.
obviously.
Well, let me just that our responsibility is to assess, assure, and warrant student learning. Students don't get to decide when they've passed and when they haven't, or if they've
Mm.
passed, they haven't. We are ultimately accountable for making a decision as to whether a student is able to be awarded credit and a qualification. That is the university, and that's the university's responsibility, and we're entrusted to do that. But students should be responsible for doing the work of learning. We share the responsibility of assessment for and as learning and inspiring and motivating learning, no
And
question.
supporting it, all of that,
But
absolutely.
I'll give you one quick example. I've looked at two assessment policies now at two universities. One of which, I'll be quite open, is Western Sydney University, and they list the responsibilities in the assessment and feedback policy and procedures for students. There's not one mention of the word learning in the responsibilities for students in the Western Sydney University assessment policy and procedure, other than learning advisor. And that struck me as really interesting. We just assume, this is what I'm talking about with the discursive, the normative discourse. It's just taken as given that assessment is about learning, that it goes without saying that assessment is about learning. But what we've done is we've stripped all of those other responsibilities out, and a new assessment policy that we are proposing has a simple purpose that says in 9 words, quite explicitly, what the purpose of assessment feedback is, which is to inspire and assure student learning. And the responsibility that we've rested squarely on the shoulders of the students is to do the work of learning, to demonstrate it for assessment. So we've taken all of the other responsibilities out and put in the one that was missing in the first place. And I think that speaks to the fact that we have lost our way. We are talking about assessment and feedback and teaching and learning in a way that has got us circulating our practice around a misfiring or a misaligned purpose. And
So do you
that's why
think,
I'm wanting to bring us back to recentering our practice around our purpose, which requires a discursive shift. And I think it's a paradigm shift that we're going through. Somebody in the chat said a paradigm shift is what we need. You don't get to decide paradigm shifts; they happen. Like it's
Be like
nothing
a
you can
black
do to.
swan.
There's nothing you can do to start them. There's nothing you can do to stop them. They happen, and when they happen, they're quick and they're destructive things. I'm going straight back to Thomas Kuhn here, who's the person who came up with the idea of a paradigm shift, even though he never actually uses that term in his book on the nature of, what is it? The nature of scientific revolutions. Is that what it is, Phil? I think that's the name. Danny's nodding. Yeah.
Mm.
So anyway, I just want to I just want to keep picking up on us when we're starting to use this terminology in a way that's slippery, because that, I think, is one of the signs that our paradigm is no longer working. It's the current paradigm that we use, the things we think to be true, the things we think to be valuable. They're starting to not be able to answer the questions, some of the critical questions we want to ask. That's like when people thought the sun and the moon and the stars went around the earth. The reason why they came to the conclusion that it didn't was because there were some critical questions that that model of the universe couldn't answer. And that's what we've got to. We've got to a point where our model of what's true and what's valuable about teaching and learning and assessment and feedback has some critical questions we can't answer. And I'll give you two of them, Thomas. How do we stop students from cheating? And how do we assure that every student who walks across the graduation stage has learned everything they need to be safe, competent, and employable practitioners? We can't answer those questions at the moment. And that tells us there's something fundamentally broken with our current paradigm, as Kane's just pointed out.
No, that's so the only thing I was gonna ask was when I think I agree with everything. However, in terms of finding our way back on track, it might be I mean, it's likely to be a radically different track than we were on before, for one thing. So the idea that we can go back to something that was stable in the first place is probably a myth. It wasn't stable in the first place. But also that track has now changed so much that it's not really going to be a useful guide for us anyway. But in terms of finding this new track and developing it, is it a matter of developing a language that allows us to communicate in the way we need to talk about the things and address the things we need to address? Or is there something else in your mind? Is it just linguistics as the foundation for finding this new track, or is it something else again?
No, this is not just linguistics.
No.
Linguistics is what is exposing the problem to us. This is how discourse works.
Well, I wouldn't underestimate linguistics. I wasn't
No, I'm
meaning to
not.
say
I'm
that.
not. I'm not. I'm not. But it's how we can see where we're getting slippery with it, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But yeah, that's what happens when paradigm shift is it's a tumultuous time. Things get shattered, lives get broken, careers get ruined, industries grind, like stop existing. But what then happens is another long, stable period of plateauing occurs as the new paradigm finds its truths and finds its feet and learns its truth. So anyway, I'll stop
Yeah,
banging on about
cool.
paradigms, but
We'll wait for your forthcoming paper. Danny, I saw you take yourself off mute before. Did you have something to jump in with, or has that moment passed?
I think I want to explore Amanda's earlier comment about, is a formative, I hate the word formative, by the way, but formative assessment task, I assume that means an assessment task that doesn't count for marks. People have different opinions of what formative means. But, that like, is a formative assessment task an actual assessment task? And to go to Phil's point that he made in the chat before as well, there are multiple purposes of assessments. And in my mind, assessment is a loose-ish term in a way, but there are multiple purposes of assessment. One around the measurement of capability, one around the opportunity to provide feedback, one around the motivation to encourage learning or to force learning or the active learning, and other purposes of assessment too. So I wonder if colleagues who are saying formative assessments can't be assessments are only looking at one purpose of assessment.
I might jump onto this one, and I'm going to flag that that was me copy pasting from a presentation of Kath's that I saw recently. So those are Kath's words, but the idea of assessment serves multiple purposes, absolutely. It's a core part of my CRADLE tattoo I have on my back, a citation to about 2000, I think.
That's monstrous nerdery, Phil.
It is. It's a short citation because it's a single authored paper, so it's okay. Look, I think assessment definitely serves multiple purposes. I think a challenge for people is to identify for a given task which purpose is the primary purpose. And I think that the assessment serves multiple purposes thing is sometimes used as it's all too hard. I know it's the final task, but it's also a developmental thing. It's this, that, and the other. Or, yeah, we give them 30% for the online unsupervised MCQ, but yeah, it's a formative task. And yeah, 30%, you're starting to talk about some reasonable grades for something that I would argue has zero validity in a time of AI. A wonderful formative activity. And yeah, I used to set, when I taught a unit that required maths that I wasn't sure the students had, I set a maths diagnostic quiz online, unsupervised, get the students to do it so I can tailor what I do to help them. We can come up with great ways that they can develop and all of that. So I think the multiple purposes thing really matters, but I think where it becomes everything serves all purposes, I think that can be a pretty harmful thing. I think we want to start from assessment can serve multiple purposes, and then we say, for this task, which one's being served most right now? Though I'd also point to a divergent view that I put in the chat, which is a paper from Gavin Brown titled, Is Assessment for Learning Really Assessment? And Gavin comes to the conclusion that no, it's not.
So that might bring us really well to start talking about some of the question and answer questions that people have put in the question and answer box. One of them is about two purposes from Brittany. So maybe we'll move to these and start off with this one. Because Brittany asks, one of the areas that I'm finding challenging is the idea of creating authentic and secured assessments in this chaos period of Gen AI. We would like to incorporate AI into assessment tasks, but we don't know what authentic use looks like. And giving students a choice in AI runs the risk of detracting from the security of the task. In a way, the current assessments are authentic as students may use AI. However, this means they're not secured. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, where is the line between authentic and secure? Does anyone want to jump on that one?
Go on, Phil. But I think that kind of speaks to what you just said. Like they're trying to satisfy multiple needs in a particular task rather than through multiple different activities.
Yeah.
I just want to laugh at the where is the line, Phil? Come on, give me a line. I want a line.
Hey. Now, look, I'm going to avoid the corporate et al. Where is the line paper, though. Hopefully someone can chuck it in the chat. I want to say they're not necessarily diametrically opposed. I think that there are aspects of authenticity that can help with security. If I'm assessing first-year computer science assignments and I do them through a code review, very authentic practice, where a senior developer sits down with a junior developer and talks through the code and asks some questions and whatnot, fairly authentic, but I'm probably adding in an inauthentic piece to it. That is the assessment security piece of asking them the tricky questions and their decision-making process and whatever through it. I think that's an instance where there can be an overlap, but the addition of the assessment security can make things a bit uneasy because people know, like, you're trying to be a cop right now. This isn't a real, true, authentic interaction we're having here of you as the senior developer. You're trying to see, did I really do this? Could I also pitch, Kath, could you talk to the authentic assessment paper from the days of contract cheating as well? Because that was one that really opened my eyes.
Yeah, okay. Remembering back to that. One of the questions that we really wanted to test, this was part of the OLT project that was led by Tracy Bretag and Rowena Harper. I was very lucky to be on that team. Phil spoke to another paper that we published out of that project, but this is another paper. One of the questions we wanted to really test and challenge was the repeated assertion in quite a lot of the academic integrity literature back then that the solution, here we go, Thomas, that there's one solution to the problem, I got a silver bullet, the solution to cheating or plagiarism was authentic assessment, because it somehow made the task feel so purposeful that students wouldn't want to cheat. So we wanted to test that proposition. We used two data sets. One was a data set from Australian University that referred to breach data, where the type of assessment task was recorded. And another data set was one that was harvested through an unsecure loophole vulnerability, I guess, in about 160 commercial contract cheating sites. That harvested information about orders that were being placed on contract cheating sites for contract cheating services. Now, we evaluated those task types against measures of authenticity in the published literature, and we had 5 different measures. And what we found is that task types with none, some, and all 5 of those authenticity measures were routinely cheated. And we could see that as evidence through both the order data and the breach data. Obviously, from the order data, we couldn't prove that the order had been fulfilled and that the student had then submitted it and then passed the assessment task. But we could see that there was a strong expectation, both from the customer and the provider, that that was a task that could easily be fulfilled through a commercial contract cheating provider. So what we were able to ascertain from that is there doesn't seem to be any empirical data to support the claim that authentic assessment design prevents cheating behaviours. It may deter cheating behaviours, but there's no evidence to suggest it prevents it. And the opposite was true, that in fact it was routinely being contract cheated, and students were to a high volume procuring tasks that were authentic, bearing all of the most or all of the hallmarks of of authentic assessment design. So that's the sort of nutshell version of that paper, Phil. Back to you.
I might just add as well that recently in a paper on authentic assessment that was led by Tim Fawns, there's a little bit in there where, because I got really frustrated that you published that paper, Kath, but people kept on still doing the authentic assessment solves the cheating problem line. And I pulled at the threads that are used to justify that sort of statement. And when you get down to them, you get down to things like an internal teaching and learning conference presentation that was never published. It's like that level of evidence, or some papers that are about nothing to do with that. But that said, if anyone's got empirical evidence specifically that authentic assessment in some way stops, deters, detects, whatever else cheating, I would love to see it. But there's some real citation decay through the literature about it.
Yeah, and we could find no empirical evidence when we looked for it. But it comes back to this point that Kay made earlier. Contract cheating, generative AI, it doesn't really matter what the student is using to outsource the production of the artifact that purports to demonstrate their learning. It's the learning isn't happening in the student. So if you're able to outsource an authentic assessment task to another person, you're able to outsource that authentic assessment task to a generative AI tool or to another person who uses a generative AI tool.
Quite simply, we've not challenged students to demonstrate their learning to a sufficient degree enough in recent years. Over the course of my time investigating contract cheating and various other forms of kind of, malfeasance, myself and my team have proven about, give or take, say 400 unique subjects across multiple unis. And that tends to say that it's never just, oh, that person over there who's not focusing on authentic assessment, they're failing somehow, and that person over there is not. Everyone's failing in different ways, or a lot of people are failing in different ways. And so I think, again, we need to be thinking about the tasks and about the pointy end. I tend to think that there's not a lot of point in awarding marks in first year because our scale is too big, it costs too much, and the marks, you're kind of feeding the beast in some ways. Students don't really get the feedback because of the marking load, and so they're just getting these false flags in some ways that everything's fine. And if they actually got to the end, they would probably find that they struggle because their feedback has been insufficient. So I'm fully behind Phil and others who highlight the need for higher quality feedback.
So just to bring this back to, we've got a lot of questions in the Q&A. We're probably not going to be able to get through all of them, but I do want to get through some of them. But one of the questions I saw from Steve Slaughter brings us back to task.
What a name. What a name.
Brings us back to task. And there's probably, I imagine if we had this conversation with the biggest audience, it might be a most common one for people who are in the position of needing to come up with or authorize assessments or whatever. And Steve said, if sit-down exams can't serve all purposes of assessment, fine. But given AI, how do we assure validity without just doing sit-down exams? What alternative tasks realistically exist at scale? And for anyone who's in this space, you'll know that sit-down exams are often presented as the only thing that we can actually rely on. So there's at least two parts to this question. One is, can we rely on them? And I think we can probably direct that fairly quickly. And then the second part is, does anything else actually exist? And I can suggest a couple of things there, but does anyone want to jump on either of those grenades?
Like, of course, there's other things. Like, for example, a student running an experiment in a lab with someone watching is a perfectly valid assessment if that's what they're intended to do. It's not a sit down exam. If we're saying, do we need someone watching all the time? Yeah, we probably do. That's a different question. Just throwing everyone in a big exam hall. And there's, as Kath pointed out before, there's flaws to exams. A uni, I won't name them, but I've already been advised that they've had someone with a tiny little camera just on their lapel here and an in-ear piece. And they were found in an exam, and that will become more common. So exams will become less reliable with tech. So, a Viva Voce is probably more challenging to get away with that kind of thing. You'd have a hard time having a real conversation with someone with, 15-second gaps to think about it.
I've done a study that we didn't publish because the results were too good to be true, where we tried to get people to fake. So we gave them assignments someone else had produced and said, go into the interactive oral with the people who are tutors, markers in the subject, and try and fake your way through it. And every time the tutors were able to tell, yeah, this person didn't actually do the task. They don't know what they're talking about. I can't say there's a good body of evidence in support of that, though, out there in the literature. And we had one failed grant application where we wanted to hire improvisers who are professional bullshitters to go and try and fake their way through some Vivas. So if anyone's got some funding for some research, I still really want to do that one. I think a real issue we have in this space is there's very little evidence in support of the claims about certain things being secure or not. So we do tend to go on tradition and what's viewed as a secure task or an insecure task. And I'd really love to see more evidence produced. My dream for all of this is that we use authentic social practices. I think that's the Rolls-Royce version of this. So I mentioned the code review. I think that's an authentic social practice of the discipline. Uh, and I distinguish that from authentic assessment. Go away and do whatever the hell you want and come back and show us the thing. I think is not generally a secure thing. But the authentic social practices where you're there doing the work of it. A lot of people will claim that placements are secure, and to a degree some are, but if we look at the artifacts of placements, which are the things that we tend to assess, the hero's journey reflective note that you write is not secure at all. That sort of thing is a common placement thing. And the other concern with placements is that they can assess some things, but not other things. So we can't say this degree is secure because it has a placement. Well, if the placement's the other thing that mattered, why do we have all these other units?
So I think I understand what you mean, but maybe you could do two birds with one stone and see if this makes sense within Tom Worthington's question, which is, don't we, or I think perhaps shouldn't we just get the students to do whatever they'll be doing as a graduate? Otherwise, why bother testing it? Or am I missing the point?
Well, there's some things that we want people to be able to do. And we as a discipline have decided that automaticity with a certain thing really matters. When I go to the doctors, if they're doing the knee bones connected to the leg bones connected to the hip bone, etc., I'm going to be terrified. Now, they need to have low-level automaticity with some things, and someone in the discipline of like anatomy and physiology could probably mount an argument saying that test you have at the end of first year where it's like 1,000 names of parts of the body is important for someone who goes on to practice in the field. I think the need for lower level stuff can still be argued for, but I think the arguments need to be made.
Mhm. I agree. I'd probably throw in another 2 points just very quickly, which is one, it's very hard to predict what actual skills they'll need. And two, it's not like skills just stack directly. We know that learning languages for young children allows them to learn other skills that are more valuable. So it's not like it's a one-to-one kind of relationship between what we're teaching and what we expect them to be able to do in the real world.
I don't think we even agree now. I think the
Mm.
tension between training students for work once they graduate versus the idea of training proto-academics and any other variations on that within staff groups or university cultures, kind of, we don't have an agreement now, let alone agreeing on a forecasted future.
No, I agree. Now we did touch on this a minute ago, but because it is important, I think it's worth asking again. And in case I didn't ask it perfectly the first time, it's even more important. But Nigel asks, what are the panel's recommendations for assuring learning for online students specifically? At our universities, we're endeavouring to have secure online assessment tasks for students who are enrolled in on-campus modes. The problem is the relatively limited number of options that appear to exist for secured assessment. Interactive oral assessments, while still possible to be compromised, are one of the more attractive. Monitored online exams are one of the least attractive. What do people think?
I'd like
Invest
Danny's
in
thoughts.
testing centers.
I want to hear Danny's thoughts.
So Phil and I disagree a little bit on this. For me, anything that is purely online falls below an acceptable threshold of security. And so, like Kane said, a testing center, having a trusted individual there present on the other end of a remote connection with a student, also acceptable. But anything where there's not a trusted individual who is not the student or someone they know is not going to be so good. And I know it makes it really difficult for online courses. I'm not, again, I want to make the distinction. Online learning, amazing. We should keep doing online learning. Online secure assessment that we rely upon to make those judgments of capability, that's where the danger zone is.
Yeah, Danny's flagged. We disagree. I think I am open to having the security of online assessment demonstrated to me. I'm not totally convinced of it as of yet, but I believe it could be possible and it might exist out there. I do think that one of the better remote proctored exams tools is going to be better than a BA that's full of essay tasks that no one ever gets to see anyone produce and are just marked as a standard traditional essay at the end. I think if you have a face-to-face degree with that or an online degree with a Swiss cheese of many different types of online assessments, I'm going to go with that degree rather than your face-to-face BA with the essays that no one ever sees the production process of at all. So I think for me, it's not about like online can never be secure. A face-to-face is always secure. And that essay is really an online task,
It is
submitted through the LMS, etc. But I'm also going to say that I have pitched to so many remote proctored exams vendors a study where I try to cheat in their remote proctored exams. And as of yet, none of them have agreed to do that study.
Just to add one little piece of defense to the essay, I think essay completed and submitted and understood within certain conditions might be a problem. But I don't know. I think Jack might have put a fantastic link to an amazing paper by a couple of really handsome young ECRs that work at CRADLE, who wrote a work on the essay why it matters and how to assess it in a secured way within the context of AI. So there might be some suggestions out there by people you employ that are worth checking out.
Can I jump in on that one? With the we've taken the two-lane approach. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Adam, from the University of Sydney, and we've adapted it at Western Sydney to be called the IA approach, the Inspire and Assure approach. And what we've done is we've overlaid those two measures of inspiration and assurance over the top of each other in a matrix. And what we're trying to demonstrate to our colleagues is the stuff that is neither inspiring or assuring, which allows us to neither motivate nor assure student learning, is stuff that we need to stop doing. And the classic example there, Phil, is your namesake Phil Newton, the SOUR assessment task, which is summative online uninvigilated remote. They sit in that bottom left-hand corner. But one of the things we're trying to show people is you can actually move from the bottom left-hand corner to the top right-hand corner, where we can both motivate and assure and celebrate student learning with just one small variation to the task. And I'll give you an example, Thomas. I have a lot of people saying to me, the essay is dead. And I say, no, 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 the essay is not dead. We still need our students to be able to essay an argument. And look what I did there. I took it back to being an active verb, to essay an argument. We've turned it into a noun, which is an essay, in which an argument is essayed. We still need students to be able to demonstrate they can essay an argument. But if we turn that 2,500 word essay, which is created by the students in their own time as a Word document and submitted online via Turnitin and then marked remotely by somebody on a Sunday afternoon, if we turn that into a face-to-face conference paper where they present their essay as a paper, just like we would as scholars in the discipline, and then there's a 10-minute question and answer afterwards, then we've suddenly turned it from a bottom left-hand quadrant to a top right-hand quadrant. Yes, there's more infrastructure around it. Yes, there's more logistics around it. But the point I'm making is it's actually within our remit, it's within our imagination to be able to change from something that is valueless to something that is highly valuable with just a small tweak.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic point, Kath. And possibly a great one to start rounding up things on. I mean, we've only got a couple more minutes, so possibly not enough time to go into any more questions. But does anyone have any final thoughts they'd like to share with people? Because we've got 420 people in the audience who are very keen to be thinking about assessment and tasks. Is there anything that we haven't covered so far in the last 55 minutes that you'd like to just add in as a last thing to be on people's minds?
If I could jump in 10 seconds. Um, that recent text release and the three different approaches that can be taken, I think that kind of middle one will fit a lot of disciplines because you cannot necessarily, like a discipline that has a lot of electives is kind of uncontrollable. But starting to think about what your learning outcomes are and how they match to people you work alongside of, rather than thinking about it, how can I solve this individually? Because you won't. You very probably won't, except you will think you will. So start talking to each other and thinking about how are we collectively going to do this. Share some of the burdens. Some units may be better for feedback, others may be better for summative marks.
Mhm. Yep, I think that's really important because one thing I've just noticed in the chat was competing views on things. People saying, well, from a scale perspective, we just couldn't possibly do Vivas at a large scale. And then someone else said, well, we did it with 800 people and it worked for us. But having those very brief discussions in a chat that is going at a million miles an hour through things are not going to help each other develop an understanding about what's working, what's not working, what's tried, and all those things. So having those open discussions is just crucial. Danny, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I just wanted to look at Stuart's question about process tracking software.
Yep.
Very briefly, what the panel thought about that.
What does the panel? Well, you're on the panel. What do you think about it?
I think it's yet another one of those straws that we clutch at. Transformation is the goal here, not these band-aids, I think.
Yeah, he's not on the panel, but I saw Sean Lehman commenting on this the other day on LinkedIn, talking about or asking, I guess, more broadly about how the nature of monitoring, but also the nature of changing it into that process, changed what the task was for him as he would complete it. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to think about when we're doing those kind of tweaks to these kind of tasks. Anyone else got any, Phil, you're opening your mouth?
Yeah. Look, my last two bits is it's all about trade-offs and compromises and us doing our best, and doing something that's better than what we were doing before is a good thing to do. So think validity, think about all the trade-offs that we have in validity. Don't go all hardcore anti-cheating, anti-AI if it's going to ruin the potential for inclusion in the task or the validity of the task or the student experience. We've got to balance so many things. It's a hard job. It's a wicked problem.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I think that's going to be us for the day. It's 3 o'clock, so everybody's got things to go on with. But thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to everybody else who was in the audience for coming along today. If you've got any questions, direct them all to Phil Dawson at cradle.com or whatever his email is. But for everybody else, we'll see you later. And the recording will be put online on the Cradle website at some point in the relatively near future. So thanks very much, everybody. I
Thanks,
hope everyone has
everyone.
a fantastic afternoon.